Well, my name is Peter, and this is Beulah, my colleague. For in 1996, 97, I started furniture production. Well, it was aspirational. It was a really small artisanal workshop, but in my mind at the time, it felt like a big furniture production setup. I was, I think, 25 at the time. And the whole idea was to kind of try to measure up aspirationally, as I say, to industrial methods of production. And the idea at the time was to try and really push so that we can also produce products like anywhere else in the world. The whole idea was to work in a way that was natural for what surrounded me. After having tried for so long to measure up to commercially based pursuits, if I could call it that. So we started to create these products, and when working with international designers and working eventually international projects, hotels, and so forth. To us, it's the energy behind that activity that is really of interest to us.
Yes.
Because the thing is, we observe architecture and we observe design in the so-called developed centers of the world. And so what we're interested in is finding a common kind of language in that sense that's applicable in different contexts and applying it to where we are within our own context. So this is our kind of exploration. And it's very subtle and it's not direct. And we don't necessarily go for it in such a way that we're hungry to express, but we try to use the limitations that we're confronted with as a way of shaping and finding that thinking pattern to see how it applies to where we fit in the world, how we don't fit, what we're able to achieve, what we try to achieve and we fail, how we adapt it. Yeah, that's basically more or less in a nutshell what we do. But we started with furniture, now we're moving on to broader context. We have a studio now which works with different clients, and we yes, our whole basis is working with techniques and craftspeople that are available. I don't know if are you able to see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so we work, in very simple, rudimentary ways, but obviously we couple that with conforming to structured ways of working. But we work with different craftspeople. Okay, like for instance, traditional potters who work with traditional materials. But in this context, we were developing, because this is typically used for storage containers, like for vessels and what do they call? Calabash. But we were translating that into the possibility of making furniture with it, right? So then the idea is to not necessarily realize a product, but to create an environment where different craftspeople can participate towards realizing something collectively. So in this case, we have the wood craftspeople who put together the frame for a template, the metal beating craftspeople who create the form that the clay person is going to mold within and around. So we take something which is traditionally done free form and we formalize it by creating a jig that the clay can then be used to. So it's taking a very rudimentary ancient process, but then creating a platform where different craftspeople can participate to assist with the clay making and realizing a particular form, which is an idea. Where hand metal is this hand beating technique, which has been around since the 1940s, 50s, where waste material from the kind of a galvanized roof production facilities was used to make buckets and so forth. But then again, it's taking that technique and trying to apply it in different ways, like to make the template or the jig for the clay, a technique that we just showed. So it's always trying to see how we can create a kind of craft economy. This bag, but using different craftspeople as well, where you have the metal craftspeople and basic sand casting using recycled aluminum from old engine parts, you know. So the idea is always to start at this very micro scale and then using what's there to realize something really sophisticated in our own way that can stand next to products from all over the world, you know, to show that even the most basic ways of working using resources which are not necessarily considered, you know, and we don't necessarily focus too much on the recycling aspect or on the craft empowerment opportunities, but more the ability to participate and engage. You know, in this case, this image you see, we were doing a project in Johannesburg in South Africa for a company where they asked us to do interiors for a tech company, and we thought to infuse a lot of craft, simple mentalities into the space, where we work formally as far as realizing forms and objects and typologies using plywood, but at the same time, the craftspeople working to build meeting rooms or pods that are very simply made. In the first image where you saw the burning of the letters, you know, we're using the Japanese process of burning wood to preserve it. But in this case, so it's always a question of finding opportunity where craft can find its place, you know, within environments where it isn't typically allowed. So even the way we work, although we have very typical ways of working, like working on computers and so forth, we work outside. We use basic methods of prototyping. We work by hand. We use rudimentary methods combined with some basic machinery. So these are just random images to give a sense of some of the methods or ways that we work. But this also, you know, goes beyond just furniture, where we like in this case, you know, we'll cross over to fashion. This is just an example of how basic a process is. Fendi sent us a bag and we took it apart and we used the handle as a jig, you know, as to cast aluminum. Or in this case, actually, this is a very playful form of what a traditional village used to be like. I don't know if you could. This is what we like to try and influence those around us to think in a very simple way, starting with what's available, you know, thought-wise. I mean, if you see here, this is a house in a village with a hedge, and the gate is an old bed, you know. So we don't necessarily like photos like this because of the recycling component. We like photos like this because of the sensibility that lies behind it. We think the proportion of the gate and the springs that are there are very beautiful and very sophisticated. This was the exhibition we had for Fendi in Miami, Design Miami in 2022, where we traveled all over the country and we engaged different craftspeople, metal craftspeople, clay, basket weaving. And in the process, we did a small video to show the landscape. And the idea is always to try and really show that it's not just a question of creating opportunities or empowerment, or that it's an opportunity to relate in a certain way, and then something kind of blossoms out of that, which has all different considerations that are being looked at kind of being a result, you know.
And obviously, one of the things that I think you're doing is you're not telling your fabricators what to do. You're looking to see what they can do and what you can do, what's a common ground between your ideas and their skills, and bringing them together.
Okay. Thanks for sharing your story. I was really impressed by how you work with materials and how you start with your resources around yourself and the thoughts as a material. And really, I'm intrigued to know more about how you make decisions on the forms for your pieces, and then do you have a constellation of storytellings or narratives that you like to explore behind your creations?
The forms, yes, it's a little bit, it works in different ways, you know. Sometimes the forms are directed by or dictated by whatever opportunities we have available to us. We always we're kind of directed by the limitations or the confined space that we work within. Confined as in what's required of us, and at the same time, the timelines involved, you know, the typical structural decision making that the designer has to work around. But most importantly is about the capability and the ability that we are able to execute or to think as broadly as possible around with as much freedom as we can have, you know. So the forms are really directed by what it is that we're doing at any particular time. But what of primary interest to us is our relationship, our relating in the process, you know. The products or the objects or the projects that we work on, of primary interest is the interaction, because we feel like the interaction is what can create a good direction for the future and the kind of identity that will formulate itself through the interaction. So the relationship really is of primary importance, but at the same time, we are confined by the so-called realities of what we have to work with. So I would encourage a sense of freedom and a sense of freedom to looking at forms that you may be preconceived as being good form, but at the same time, you allow something which is not typically practiced to be brave enough to try and express it, maybe in a subtle way. Maybe people won't necessarily pick up on it, but for yourself and for the people you're working with, it kind of starts to grow a way of thinking and a way of working and a way of interaction.
Thank you. I love that process. I think it's amazing.
Okay.
There's something, the idea of generosity is important in design, and the way housing is built in the United States, you never have the sense of generosity. You may have the sense of prestige. You have the sense of prestige, or you have the sense of poverty. And it's either that we had to cut corners, or look how luxurious your house can be.
And exactly.
That quality of generosity is never a component. It's rarely a component.
Exactly.
And so the idea of generosity, I think, is very important in creating a well-being into a house, into a home, where people feel happy that they're there. You know? Any other questions?
Yes, I think also a lot of it's difficult because to express things as a designer or as an architect, to express generosity in an environment where the generosity itself seems like, because you're working, typically the person who's generous in the sea of typical ways of working is thinking in isolation. So the generosity itself almost seems like it's it's an ingredient as opposed to an intrinsic part of the project, you know. We found when you try and practice that,
Yes.
where it's almost as if it hopefully gets to a point where generosity doesn't have to be something which is considered, and it's just a way of working for the individual like yourself, being conscientious of the fact that it's needed.
I really want to understand, because we're essentially trying to create a blueprint, right, for this housing solution. So I want to understand how you provide the craftsman direction, but still, that room to express themselves and to utilize their own knowledge and experiences.
I don't think it's something that one has to worry too much about being too constraining, because the environment itself will, if you come with a mentality of wanting to adopt or execute to the exact detail of the blueprint or the drawing that you have, you're going to be forced to grow and to become broader and more flexible, because the environment will do that to you inevitably. So I think if you're as conscientious as all of you are, it's going to provide fertile ground for things to move in a direction that even surprises you. So I don't think you need to worry too much about that. You need to you start where you are. Don't think that where you are isn't up to the task, or it's going to be either belittling or domineering, or you start where you are with the good nature that you have. But I think if you just start with where you are and if the architect and the designer treats themselves as a craftsperson as well, so I think because I think essentially sometimes in the world of design with computers and everything else, people forget that they're essentially craftspeople, drawing lines, considering forms. Yeah, same as a craftsperson, taking materials, beating it, turning it around, taking a look, stepping back. It's a very human process,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys. Nice to meet all of you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.